Hey everyone, it's time for probably the most awaited, the most eagerly anticipated video that I'm going to be publishing before the epic raid race, and that is going to be our little DPS review after Outbreak got nerfed, after all these other options got nerfed like Barrow Dyad. I mean, arguably those options probably wouldn't have been meta regardless, but what's the DPS going to be for the epic raid race? Today, September 25th, we're going to be talking about it. So let's go ahead and take a look at our outline for today. We have 6 sections. We have our methodology as usual for testing. Passes 1 and 2, where I tested a very big group of weapons and then a smaller group of weapons. We have our core options that I'm going to recommend. We have our utility options for, tractor, galley, etc. We have loadout recommendations, because a lot of people are asking what nade were you using when you were using Haliaetus, etc. And then finally, we have my strategy recommendations for specific bosses, since all 4 bosses, presumably, are going to be making a repeat appearance in the Desert Perpetual Epic Raid Race. So, without further ado, as I tend to say, let's go ahead and get started with methodology. So, there's a lot of stuff people wanted me to test, from Dragon's Breath, to Microcosm, to Whisper, to, Haliaetus, to Grapple Melee. I tested a lot of stuff, okay? And I did not have the time to test all of these options on a real raid boss, right? Templar got nuked, Templar is kind of annoying with splash damage, etc. And I wanted to test on some real contest bosses, right? So I tested on Corregos specifically with Cutthroat active. That's as close as you're going to get to a day 1 experience. Hardest damage check in the raid, and of course it's Cutthroat -30. Contest is likely going to be -40 or something similar to that. I think -30 is probably a little too easy for people. And so yeah, Cutthroat was enabled. But I don't have time, obviously, to do Corregos mechanics for 20, 30, 40 different damage options on 3 different classes. So what I did instead was I went into a 10 power firing range, made it consistent, well surges, no assembler, no debuff, and using the DPS meter just approximately, I tried to find what was worth a look, worth a deeper look. Okay, so that was pass 1, where I tested a lot of stuff, 30, 40 options. Next, we have pass 2. Pass 2 is where I took the handful of options that I thought legitimately had a shot at being useful based on the data from pass 1 in order to do testing on an actual boss, aka Cutthroat Corregos. Well with surges was there, assembler, tractor, Gjallarhorn if applicable, and no support auto or edge of action. Basically, a realistic look at what you could potentially achieve in an actual day 1 setting. You're going to have assembler, you're going to have tractor, you're going to have well in surges, and you will have galley if that's something your team decides on using with something like Haliaetus. But you might not have something like support auto, and you're most likely not going to have edge of action. So that's my methodology. Let's go ahead and move on to passes 1 and 2. You don't need to read this slide. I'm just going to show you what I tested for posterity's sake. Pass 1, I tested, as you can see, a lot of stuff, right? There's Hierarchy of Needs, Thunderlord, Outbreak, Grand Overture, Teraba, Manticore, Tiku's Divination, Triton Winterbite. There's Finality with both SMGs. There's Euphony with Wicked Sister. There's lots of stuff, okay? Lots of stuff. I tested a lot of it, and eventually I narrowed it down to the following options from pass 2. We have Grapple Melee, Haliaetus with Nade Spam, Parasite Mint swaps, Finality Mint with PKs or with Lucky Pants, stuff like that, Gjallarhorn Tractor as supporting cast members, and then Hush. Now, you might be wondering, why is Hush here? Hush, I'm specifically talking about Hierarchy of Needs stacking 3 rings and using a legendary bow with Archer's Tempo and Archer's Gambit, or Attrition Orbs and Archer's Gambit, in order to abuse the new artifact mod called Argent Quiver, which boosts bow damage, and there's a semi-auto striker mod that also gives you armor charge upon hitting bow crits, as well as a couple other weapon options that can also give you armor charge. So using this tech, you can super gen really, really fast. I think it's even faster than PKs. You make orbs really, really quickly if you want to super spam with Star Eater and stuff like that. And so the DPS actually ended up being fairly decent, right? 152k, similar to like Parasite Mint, because of the sheer number of crashes I was able to get off. However, the fact that you need 3 Hierarchy of Needs users in order to spawn in those 3 stacking rings, just so like 2 people essentially are going to get a damage boost, because you obviously still need a tractor that's probably running around doing mechanics. Not the greatest, right? Not the greatest. And so because of that, I'm just going to drop Hush off this list, and we're going to be left with basically the top 4 options as our standouts, which are what we're going to be talking about today. One more thing, I also do want to talk about Ill Omen, because I think some streamers and some day 1 players have been testing it recently, specifically for bosses like Hobgoblin and especially Wyvern. Wyvern takes additional ability damage. Well, at least we think it does. Super damage, he definitely takes more. It's like 54% more super damage or something like that. So supers are still really, really good on him. I think he also takes more ability damage as well, because I was on Apotheosis well on my team, and I was doing almost the same damage as T-Crash Titans while being on Tractor. And so I think the solar nades that I was throwing do additional damage to him. Even when he was moving out of them, to be honest, I was doing still like pretty good damage. So apparently like well conversion also counts for this. Like when you're in your well and you do damage to Wyvern, it's like 54% more or something like that. So that's something to keep in mind. And I think that's part of why Ill Omen looked good on Wyvern. I don't think necessarily it's going to be a good option for any of the other bosses. I know people were testing it with like attrition orbs, grenade kickstart, and orb mods on their boots, because attrition orbs got buffed. I know it got nerfed on area denials, but it got buffed across the board. And swords with wolf packs were already really good at spamming orbs. And so if you have a bunch of people using attrition orbs on, you know, Ill Omen and just spamming orbs all the time and just like spamming nades over and over, you can get a lot of nade uptime. However, this was all kind of contingent or all kind of planned around the fact that somebody got a sword one phase using this strat on Wyvern. Parasite Mint, when my team has been using it repeatedly over the past couple weeks, almost always one phases Wyvern as well. So in my opinion, I think Ill Omen, like the fact that you're using a sword without Relentless, meaning your ammo economy is a lot worse, and the fact that it's, I don't know, a little unorthodox, and I don't know, at least when I was watching people doing Ill Omen testing from a variety of streamers, it didn't look very consistent and it looked a bit weird. So I'm maybe not the biggest fan of Ill Omen, and I didn't do extensive testing on it, so, you know, I could be wrong here. But based on what I saw, at least my initial observations, I wouldn't say that it's like a crazy outlier or anything like that, and not really something that most teams should really be investing in. Granted, if you've already tried it and you're seeing success with it on something like Wyvern and your team loves it, go for it. I'm not going to stop you. You know, testing your own testing and your own, you know, personal experiences and your own practice is obviously, that's king. But I'm just here to provide more universal recommendations, let's just say. So that's my note on Ill Omen. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about our first core option here. So the following slides, all of the damage stuff that you see is going to be specifically raw numbers from the wipe screen on Corrigos. Now, in the past, I've said wipe screen is not super accurate. Unfortunately, with other people doing galley and tractor and doing a little bit of damage to keep their wells up, etc., it was just not possible to use DDT for these tests. On top of that, wipe screen is not that bad these days. There are a couple sources that do affect the wipe screen differently than the health bar, but none of the stuff that I was using today should have really been a problem. So yeah, I mean, hopefully it's fine, but I think it was pretty representative of what I was seeing on the health bar, and also in practice when I was actually using this with my day one team to practice on an actual boss. The stuff that is higher numbers on these slides did in fact kill the bosses faster. So hopefully that's enough to satiate your curiosity there. So let's start with grapple melee. I know Haminator, my good friend, my commander Haminator, has recommended grapple melee for a lot of the bosses here because it's super simple, super straightforward, and that's kind of like the appeal of it. Super easy, no ammo requirement, or no heavy ammo requirement at least. And so I tested grapple melee. I performed this on Heart of Inmost Light, no Banner of War, because you're not going to have Banner of War for Corrigos, it's probably going to run out. Bastion, no Shield Crush access, because I wasn't asking one of my teammates to give me like Woven Mail and stuff. Not perfect, right? My Bastion phase of doing grapple melees was very good. And then I swapped to 1-2 punch, and then I think the grapple point disappeared like while I was about to grapple to at one point at the end. So I missed like 3 or 4 grapples at the end. But I was able to hit around 150k, which is on Titan, so you can see it's in red there. But you could definitely get higher than that if you were a little bit more optimal. But I wanted just like an average representation of like a person who's practiced this, what their damage would probably look like if they didn't mess up horribly. And so that was like 145k. Now, a couple things I want to mention here. Combination blow obviously is bugged right now. We don't know if Bungie is planning on addressing it or fixing it by the time the race is out. So that could be potentially annoying if you want to use combination blow on Wyvern, but it is pretty good. Combination blow grapples are very strong. And I think if there's a single boss where I would definitely consider grapple melee, even if I wasn't grappling the whole raid and I wasn't like a grapple team, like a grapple strategy, it would probably be Wyvern, right? Because we've talked about it. Wyvern might take more grapple melee damage than other bosses. I'm not 100% sure if it's all ability damage or just super damage. Wyvern has access to Syntho. It's possible that you get Syntho if you leave some of the ads up. And then of course, combination blow, you have time to stack it and actually use it on the Wyvern as well. And so yeah, I was seeing that the non-combination blow, like more consistent options, like when people were using like Widow Silk on Strand and Surturachne, when people were using non-melee buff grapples, they were doing worse than my team that was doing Parasite Mint. But if you do choose to kind of go for that higher ceiling when it comes to damage, grapple melees I can see one facing Wyvern on -30, just to be clear, not on actual contest. We don't know what that's going to be like. But on -30 at least, you know, grapple melees will probably one phase Wyvern if your teammates are doing them correctly. Okay. I also tested 1-2 punch versus raw grapples versus Bastion. I will say 1-2 punch is significantly better than raw grappling the less melee buffs you have, which makes sense because it's an additive buff. I would say raw grappling is not so good if you don't have any kind of melee buffs at all, so I would strongly recommend against doing that on day one, where you're unlikely to have a lot of the buff stacking that you would in like a typical solo challenge environment. And then 1-2 punch versus Bastion, they're very similar. I will say Bastion is a lot more forgiving, is what I will say, right? Bastion is way more forgiving because you have way more time to slow down, back up, get your feet in the right position while you're charging up Bastion and hitting those bursts, and then you can look up and grapple and kind of just take your time. Whereas with 1-2 punch, if you want to be competitive compared to Bastion DPS, it is competitive. They are similar. 1-2 punch is a little bit higher, but you do need to shoot really fast and flick really fast, right, in order to meet that DPS level. And then you have Widow's Silk. Widow's Silk, if you don't want to use Navigator, I mean, you could use it in conjunction with Navigator too, but Strand Hunter with Widow's Silk, you get 2 grapples, and at the start of damage, you can just grapple, and it makes a grapple point for your teammates. And then, you know, while your grapple is recharging, like over time, getting that second charge, in case you ever miss, you have another grapple as well. So very, very forgiving and also good for making your teammates grapple points. So expect all classes to get somewhere around the 130 to 150k range in the 80-second Corregos phase. If you have any sort of buffs on top of that, from Banner to, you know, Shield Crush to what have you, Synthos, Combination Blow, it's going to be higher. But yeah, this is just the baseline value that I want to talk about. So let's talk about upsides and downsides. I'll mention this for every single core option. The upside of grapple melee is that it's straightforward once you learn it. Once you learn it, you kind of just copy paste the same thing on all the bosses. So it's pretty straightforward. No power ammo requirement. You can run around a sword if you want to. And then very potent with Syntho bonus available, which granted is not going to be most bosses, like maybe Hobgoblin, Hydra sometimes, but again, I'm not going to really recommend grapple melee on Hydra. I don't think even the grapple melee teams are doing that because it's a bit foolish, and we'll talk about why when we get to the strategy section. And then on Wyvern, you know, it's possible, right? And then downsides of grapple melee, I would say there's quirks you need to learn about grapple melee, so it's definitely not something you can just pick up and do right away, despite what people are kind of saying, especially on bosses like Corregos. I had a lot of tracking issues on Corregos until people were telling me, oh, you gotta like wait a little bit with your grapple and like flick downwards so you don't like track into his bottom lip area and like kind of get a no-reg. There's also potential danger with grapple meleeing if you don't have something like Cert where you're getting woven mail every single grapple. On Corregos in particular, I did a lot of damage testing on not contests, but Cutthroat Corregos with a bunch of different damage options. And the closest I came to dying was definitely grapple melee. It was definitely grapple melee. Now, granted, I was doing this on Titan with Hoyle, right? And no woven mail. So if you did this on Cert on Hunter, you'd probably be fine. But because I had no woven mail and because grapple melee requires you to be up next to the boss, there's usually going to be a laser that's rotating melee range of the boss, right? There's 2 layers of the laser. The inner layer is probably going to be there at some point. And so with other damage options that are more traditional, you can just move backward and forward and still do damage. But with grapple melee, you either have to tank the laser, you have to like grapple through it so that you don't take as many ticks, or you need to stop doing damage until the laser has passed you. And so, kind of annoying, I suppose. I mean, if your teammates spec around you and there's like renewal or there's woven mail or whatnot, it's fine. But, you know, that is something I would like to mention. You do need a backup plan if your grapple misses or the grapple point disappears. Obviously, Strand Hunter is the most forgiving when it comes to this. It's very unlikely that you will be out of your grapple on Strand Hunter, or that the grapple point will be gone because your grapples make them. But, you know, if you're playing Titan or Warlock, you may need to have, like, I don't know, powerful attraction and just, like, pick up the orbs that your team has generated over time and use some, like, grenade, you know, innervation or something on your boots in order to get your grapple back in case you lose it. And I would say grapple melee also is something that is a very team playstyle dependent thing. So if your full team doesn't really commit to grapple melee, you kind of can't grapple melee. I mean, you can, but it's going to be like kind of awkward. It's kind of something that everybody has to be on board with. So if your team is the type of team that's very familiar with grapple melee, maybe your team is like filled with solo players, challenge players, and you guys all love grapple melee and you're having great success with it, makes sense. But not something that I would try to push solo or try to push onto people that are maybe not as comfortable with it, especially given that there's like only a couple days until the race, right? So definitely like a playstyle type of thing. And also, again, finally, probably not a good idea on a pop tease, given that he's flying and 1-2 punch is really awkward on him, etc., etc. I mean, even the solo people and the grapple enthusiasts will tell you that. So yeah, that's it for grapple melee. Let's go ahead and move on to our next slide. Finality PKs. So I'd like to apologize to Peacekeepers a little bit. I did slander them a little bit in the last video by not mentioning them at all, I suppose. And people were asking me why I didn't mention them. And part of this was because I tested Finality's Augur with Attrition Chaos Reshaped Yeartide, right? And a lot of people wanted me to retest with Antidate. And when I initially did my testing in the firing range with Antidate versus Attrition Chaos Reshaped Yeartide Apex, the results were kind of similar. They were kind of similar. However, it wasn't a perfect test. We were just kind of breezing through the tests in order to find what was pretty solid. And I was like, okay, well, Yeartide and Antidate are pretty similar, but Yeartide actually makes orbs. And of course, you know, it kind of makes sense because Yeartide Surge matches Finality. So you can just run like 3 Solar Surges or something instead of running like 2 Arc, 1 Solar like you would with Antidate. So I was like, okay, logically in my head, it makes sense. And then when we actually came to testing Yeartide on Corregos, I hit like 130k, which is not great, But thankfully, last night I got a lot of messages and people were like, you should definitely retest with Antidate. You know, Bog on my dog, reach out, bless that guy. You know, we did some testing and he has better armor than I do. And he has like a perfect Antidate and stuff like that. And he's very familiar with the rotation, right? So he did the rotation, he did it really well. And he got 150k. He got 150k. I think he hit like almost 155k, 156k around there at some point, right? So, you know, it just goes to show that, you know, sometimes loadouts can make a difference. Armor can make a difference, right? He has much better armor than I do. He is like, I think he had like 200 super and 180 weapons, even on Arc, which is not... Arc, if you don't know, the fragments are not the best when it comes to boosting super and weapons. So he has really, really good stats. And Antidate is definitely better from what we were seeing. We tested Yeartide, we tested Antidate again. It's definitely better, right? Even though it doesn't surge match Finality. So that's something you should be aware of. And we tested with tier 4 bait and switch mint with 2 arc and 1 solar surges. We tested with 2 solar and 1 arc, and obviously that's going to be worse because Finality accounts for less of your super generation and less of your total damage compared to your SMG. We tried a couple things also because I'm sure people are curious about this if they're using PKs. Temporal Blast is worse than Temporal Armaments. They are very similar. I think Temporal Blast is a tiny bit better when you're not under contest conditions. But remember, Temporal Blast has a flat damage threshold in order to activate the blast. And as you scale lower and lower in power, the blast takes longer and longer to activate and gets worse and worse, right? So we decided Armaments is better. We also tried Temporal Loader on Corregos himself, by the way. This was not in the firing range. We tried it on Corregos. I was on Prismatic Hunter and I was throwing like 4 different slow sources at the boss to keep him slowed permanently. And Bog just went to town with a Temporal Loader, Rewind Target Lock Antidate. And while he did get supers faster, the actual overall damage was pretty much the same. And so I'm not going to recommend Temporal Loader for day 1 for Corregos. It's cool, it's fun, it's nice being able to shoot an SMG for like 20 seconds straight and just get a super. It is really fun, don't get me wrong. But the setup it requires and the slow and stuff that it requires, it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it for essentially the same damage, right? I think it was a little less actually. So there's that. We tried subbing Mint Retrograde for Festival Flight because Festival Flight has Envious. It is an option that you can try. It was around the same. So you may as well just use Mint, right? Not really a reason to use Festival Flight. Maybe one guy on Attrition or Festival Flight. It's up to you really. But yeah, just use Mint. Honestly, it was like around the same. And then Anarchy. I've answered this on stream already, but on paper, Anarchy is much worse than Finality. Despite the fact that its Surge matches Antidate, Anarchy requires reprocking every 10 seconds, which is much more annoying. And on top of that, you need to reload it manually unless you want to run holster. And you need to do this every 30 seconds, and the phase is 80 seconds. So you're going to need to manually reload twice. On top of that, the DPS is worse than Finality's Augur, and the Super Gen is much worse than Finality's Augur. So Anarchy, no-go. It's a no-go against Antidate and Yeartide, whatever you're using. Dynamo and Distribution. We did some testing. I don't think you should run Dynamo on your helmet. Just run 200 super, run 3 font mods on your helmet. Distribution, though, you should definitely run on your class item because there's nothing else you should really run there besides Powerful Attraction. Just run 2 Distribution and 1 Powerful. And then finally, Hunter with Lucky Pants. I would say Hunter with Lucky Pants and Finality, it's fine, right? It's definitely worse than Titan because you're powering a much worse super in Golden Gun. It's like a utility super that makes orbs rather than like a damage, like raw damage super. And the DPS is definitely worse, right? So you'll come to see, I mean, like I mentioned in the last video, that Hunter is definitely more of a supportive role here. None of the 4 options here are really going to be Hunter standouts when it comes to damage, besides maybe grapple melee. And even then, that's only if you have like Syntho and combination blow available. Duration on this thing is technically infinite, basically. I mean, like it requires like several minutes worth of damage time for you to actually run out of Finality ammo, even if you keep max turret up time. So we're just kind of going to consider it to be like infinite. You don't really run out of special ammo either if you're using Rewind Antidate. So upsides and downsides, let's briefly talk about this. So upsides, mostly primary damage, right? So you don't really need to worry too much about ammo generation. I mean, a special finisher to keep you up, and then maybe like one heavy brick per phase, to be honest, is probably enough. And mechanically very easy to execute. So pretty consistent, pretty easy to use. I can see why a lot of people like this and have been using it over the past like month or so in training for this next day one. Now the downsides though, and you know, me and Bog were kind of discussing this. I think his VOD is available maybe from yesterday. Anyways, just check his VOD from last night. We had a kind of fruitful discussion about the nature of contest damage and why you might not want to use PKs. And so the downside is it's very committal, right? You have to be holding left click and really going for those crits, because if you miss crits on PKs, you do lose a lot of super gain. So yeah, you need to be very committal. You got to be like ADSing, locked in, and you can't really do damage and mechs at the same time due to the nature of PKs. If you stop shooting, you reset your PK stacks, right? And on longer range bosses, like for example, Hobgoblin, when he TPs up, you know, you're not going to be doing any PKs damage there. So you're just going to have to stick to like Mint, and your Finality turret might not even be able to reach the boss depending on where he TPs to. Non-crit bosses like Wyvern that don't really expose their crit. Also, you know, you're losing a lot of super gen there. And the DPS of Finality PKs also doesn't really compare against the top strategies that we're going to discuss today, or I should say top strategy with a Y. So those are the downsides of Finality PKs. And when we come to the strategy section of this video, it will make more sense, despite the fact that my testing was not perfect and that we got Bog in to replace, and he got 150, 155k on, you know, per phase with the same conditions. Even still with that addendum, I'm still not going to recommend Finality PKs for this next day one, and we'll get there once we reach the strategy section. We have two more core options to talk about, so let's not waste any more time. Part 3, core options, Parasite Mint swaps. So this was tested using tier 5 bait and switch Mint, tier 4 reservoir burst finite maybe with reconstruction, and 1 solar, 1 strand surge, and 1 solar holster. Now, Parasite Mint, for those of you that are not familiar, the way that it works is you shoot Parasite and you give yourself Worm Byproduct. Worm Byproduct is, I believe, a 15% increase to the damage of other weapons while it's active. You just need to do a little bit of self-damage. And so the way this works is Parasite normally is balanced around the fact that you need to manually reload it. But because Parasite is internally coded as a drum GL instead of as like a rocket with like one single shot, it actually works with holsters. And holsters, they trigger actually quite quickly when you only have 1 in the mag, right? Holsters, obviously, they're like a stepped reload. They reload over time, but Parasite only has 1 in the mag. So the first trigger of a holster will immediately fully reload Parasite. And so you can abuse this in order to do Parasite 2-min shots, Parasite 2-min shots, Parasite 2-min shots, keeping your Worm Byproduct uptime all the time while buffing one of the best special weapons in the game when it comes to DPS. So that's how the rotation works. The damage you can hit here is around the same as PKs on Titan, 150k-ish, and 177k on Warlock with Sanguine, because a big downside, as you may have noticed, is that we're only running 1 of each Surge and 1 holster. With Sanguine, if you're running Strand or Solar, you can have 4 effective Surges for one part of your rotation. You can run 2 Surges for the other part of your rotation, so you can run 4 Solar, 2 Strand, or 4 Strand, 2 Solar, and then you can also have your holster still. So Sanguine, despite the fact that it's powering a worse super in Needlestorm compared to Thunder Crash, it's still going to do more damage because of just how much the Surges are helping here. Duration-wise, this is our first rotation that the duration actually falls a little short, especially on Titan, where you don't have the option to place like Weaver's Call riffs or, you know, throw your nade and stuff like that. On Titan, you're really just going to be focusing on the weapons for the most part, whereas with Strand Warlock or even Solar Warlock, there's going to be some downtime where you're doing other things in order to extend the total damage of the rotation. So 152k on Titan, my rotation ended at 70 seconds, 177k on Warlock. Despite that being higher DPS, I was also doing damage for the full 80 seconds of the phase. Okay, so upsides of this rotation, very straightforward and weapons focused. Weapons focused, compatible with pretty much every boss in the entire raid. Maybe Hydra not so much because you don't get Worm Byproduct very easily there. Your DPS will match PKs on Titan and outperform anything you could do with PKs or anything you could do with Finalities on Warlock by a lot. Right, so 177k is pretty good, right? And then downsides, unfortunately, Worm Byproduct, like I mentioned, annoying on Apoptes because doing self damage on Apoptes when he's floating away from you, very annoying, especially with how Titan Jump works. You have to be kind of melee range, right? So you can still obviously do mint damage or sniper damage when the boss goes up during something like a Gryos, but you know, you'd have to be melee range. You're limited by ammo. It is a pretty ammo hungry rotation. Now it's using pretty ammo efficient weapons. Parasite, very ammo efficient weapon. Mint, ammo efficient weapon. You're finite, maybe you can swap it to a Trace, Rocket Sidearm, Glaive, whatever. And you know, special finishes are plenty these days. So while it is limited by ammo more than Finality PK, I would say it's a more consistent option for a lot of the bosses that we're going to see coming up in this raid. So we'll discuss that in a second here. And finally, I want to say the DPS while it is like technically the second highest of the bunch that we're going to talk about today, it doesn't truly excel. It doesn't truly excel, right? And when I say truly excel, I'm talking about our fourth core option, which is, hello, good friend, Haliaetus. So the test for Titan, you'll notice I'm testing all four on Titan here just to kind of provide like a flat reference. The test was performed on Curus, not Hoyle, Storm Grenade, Tier 5 Cluster Bipod Haliaetus with Temporal Armaments, Touch of Thunder, Shock Magnitude, Tier 5 Bait and Switch Mint, and Lord of Wolves. Now, you can swap out the Bait and Switch Mint and Lord of Wolves for New Malpice and like, you know, Finite maybe if you want. But Mint Lord of Wolves is what I went for first because that was like my gut instinct, right? A lot of these rotations I kind of did on the fly, kind of off the dome, just kind of made them up on the spot. So a couple of mentions that I want to talk about. Bipod versus Aggregate. Big debate right now. Bipod is definitely better on Strand Warlock. On Titan, I saw two of my teammates, one of them has Bipod, one of them has Aggregate. They were both hitting very high numbers, right? So you can kind of use either. I will say Bipod is probably better in the long run because it's like a little bit more ammo efficient and allows you to use less special ammo because you spend more time shooting your rocket. And so it'll be a little less like less tight on the ammo requirements, I guess, when you go down and, you know, you need to make ammo for yourself. Temporal Loader. A lot of people were asking me to test this. Temporal Loader doesn't really make a difference because on the phase where Haliaetus is most relevant, which is, you know, Corregos, you're gonna run out of rockets anyway. And if you're gonna run out of rockets anyway, then there's no reason to reduce your rocket damage in order to be able to shoot rockets more often. On top of that, Temporal Loader also has the requirement of needing to have the boss load all the time. And when I did test this for DPS compared to, you know, just using temporal armaments, it really was not that different. It was not a noticeable difference. Okay. Temporal Blast. I didn't actually test Temporal Blast on this rocket, but on paper, Temporal Blast is much worse than Temporal Loader. So, I'm sorry, than Temporal Armament. So, probably don't bother with Temporal Blast. Pulse versus Storm Nade. Now, Pulse Nade, I know it looks appealing because with Touch of Thunder, it makes ionic traces every time the pulse goes off. Yes, I understand that. However, I think a lot of teams have tested this, Pulse versus Storm. And if you find that pulses are better for your team, go for it. But Storm Grenades were doing more damage for me, as well as a couple other people that I talked to that were testing. Also, on paper, Storm Grenades just do more damage than Pulse Grenades. But yeah, Pulse Grenades, I don't know. The ionic traces, I think they like get stuck on the boss or something, unless you're like close to him as well. I don't know. You can experiment with that. That's up to you. I'm going to leave that up to you. Pulses were not that much worse. So if you want to try pulses, at bare minimum, you're not going to be like neutering your damage by that much. Okay. But in my experience, Storms were better. Hoyle versus Curus. Now you might think, oh, you're spamming a lot of nades, right? Haliaetus gives you a lot of nades back. Surely Hoyle, that boosts your nade damage by 35%, is worth it versus Curus. Hoyle, unfortunately, requires you to use your thruster. And when you use your thruster, Bray Legacy now has 2 abilities it needs to fill instead of 1. So that can make your nade uptime a little bit iffy, number 1. And you can space out your thruster usage so you are keeping that 5-second timer going like no matter what. And you're not really like thinking too much about it. But I will say, you get maybe 3 or 4 T crashes using this rotation during damage. And Curus versus Hoyle, that's a bigger difference, like a noticeably bigger difference than having increased damage on your nades. Because a lot of this damage is coming from your weapons as well as your super, right? So your nades, while you are throwing a lot more nades than a typical damage option, you are not throwing enough that 35% more in your nades is worth losing a lot of damage on your super, right? Your supers are still crazy strong. So Hoyle versus Curus was noticeably better. Like the difference between Storm and Pulse, I would say it was noticeable, but not noticeable, right? Curus versus Hoyle was noticeably different. Okay, so use Curus. On Warlock, I had a lot of people ask me to try a bunch of different stuff. I tried Sanguine on Strand. I tried Sunbracers on Solar because Sunbracers make solar grenades burn for longer. It's yada yada yada. Throw solar nades. I tried Prismatic, right? The Duck, I think it's stuck. Nice Brit chap. He big fan of Prismatic. You know, Weaver's Call, Hellion, the Dynamo spamming build where you get a lot of needle storms and stuff. And I tried it. It was fun. It was fine. Don't get me wrong. It was like 30-40k worse than Sanguine on Strand. Okay, so I'm not going to recommend that. And then finally, Assembler. Assembler, it's pretty good. If you want to have your Warlock on like Solar Nade, Touch of Flame, and Assembler during damage, and you want them to be on your well, but you don't want them to be on Galley or Tractor or something, it does decent damage. It's like 150k, 160k, which is like, that's fine, right? For a class that doesn't have like a damage super, that's pretty decent, right? So yeah, Assembler is usable with this as well if you want to do that. So in terms of results, as you can see at the bottom here, Titan 200k, Warlock 210k. In actual practice with my day one team where people were tryharding and sweating, I hit 212k, I think, and one of my Titan teammates hit like 205, 210k or something like that. So Titan and Warlock pretty close together. But yeah, that's pretty cool. Duration 80 seconds. Warlock is a little less hungry on the ammo, but you do actually end up doing damage for the entire phase, right? You do dump for the entire phase. You're not like waiting at the end and doing nothing. Upsides to Haliaetus: insane DPS and total damage. Easy armor farming because the stats that you want are grenade and then super and then grenade and then weapons, which Grenadier, hello, it's like super easy, just get a weapon tertiary. And allows you to use exotic specials, right? So a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about today, I mean, grapple melee, you can use an exotic special, obviously, but Parasite and Finality, you can't use an exotic special. So if you want to use Choir, you want to use New Malpais during mechanics, you can't. But with Haliaetus, you can, which is cool. Downsides, a little riskier than other options. I will say after the blast like self-damage changes, you can bipod rocket your teammate in the back and you won't die. So that's an upside of bipod, I guess. I think with aggregate people were dying, but if you shoot one of your teammates in the back with bipod, unless you're already low, you're just not going to die. So not that risky, but still, it is a rocket, so I do have to, throw in a word of caution. It's going to be a little riskier than other options. And clusters and grenade tracking definitely have issues on some bosses. I'm looking at bosses like Agraios and like Iatros, right? Like Hob and Wyvern, where they can definitely just walk out of your nade. Even if you have Storm Nade, which has like the tracking cloud or whatever, they can still just walk out of your nade, and the clusters are probably just not going to hit a lot of them, right? So that's something to know as well. Okay, so now we've talked about all 4 core options. Now let's go ahead and talk about some utility options. For those of you that are on debuff duty, for those of you that are on galley duty, what's the numbers looking like? So Hunter, 105k damage, pretty decent. On Lucky Pants, Golden Gun, Mint, Agape with Rewind Precision Instrument. We have Titan, 115k damage on PKs, T-Crash, Mint Antidote, Rewind, pretty straightforward stuff. And then Warlock, Warlock damage is definitely higher than this, by the way. It's like probably 100, 105, 110, maybe even higher than that potentially, right? This is only because I was doing mechanics, right? I was doing mechanics. The Hunter and Titan rotations that I tested here, I was not doing mechanics. I was just focused on doing damage. On Warlock, this 80k number is just from my memory because I do Tractor and Chronon pickups on Warlock on my team. And on Tractor and Mechanics and Apotheosis Solar Nades, I did 80k. I did 80k on my team, or like 70, 80k with Apotheosis Veil while doing Chronons. If I wasn't doing Chronons, I think I'd probably hit, significantly higher than that. That's why there's an asterisk there, just so you know, okay? So pretty similar. All of them pretty similar, just expect them to hit like 100, 110k. Next, we have, if they're not doing mechanics. If they're doing mechanics, expect them to hit less. Gjallarhorn, with a little asterisk here. Some people, they say you don't need Gjallarhorn with Haliaetus. Some people prefer it on Haliaetus. In my experience, in my limited time testing over the past 2 days, I would say I think I had some issues getting my nade consistently back when I was using no galley with Haliaetus on Corregos. And when I added the galley back in, it felt more consistent. However, your mileage may vary. Maybe your team, does something a little bit differently. You don't need galley. Try it out. You will technically get more damage without a galley, right? But you can also just put your Hunter on galley. And if you put your Hunter on galley, even if they decide to be on a rocket, even, whether they're on Haliaetus or galley, their damage is not going to be that different, right? It's going to be like 120k, 120k versus like 140k, right? I did damage on like Renewal Hunter with like utility stuff, and I think I did like 145k. So, damage is not going to be that different because Hunter not supporting any good like damage supers and not supporting any like really good damage grenades either. So Hunter, I think, is probably the best candidate to put on galley. 110k damage, Lucky Pants, Golden Gun, Mint, Agape. Titan, 120k damage, Peacekeepers, Thunder Crash, Mint, Antidote. You can also put your Hunter on not Lucky Pants, on like Speed Loader Slacks and do double special instead. That's what my Hunter is doing, I believe. So that's also an option. And then Warlock, just assume that you'd probably hit around the same damage as the rest of these classes on Apotheosis Veil. Galley, Well of Radiance, Apotheosis Veil, Touch of Flame, Solar Nades, Mint, Finite, maybe. You guys have seen me do this 1,000 times. So, there's that. Yeah, these 2 slides, I mean, I think everyone kind of understands how these options work at this point. I just wanted to show you around how much damage you should expect to lose, for example, if you choose to use a galley versus a Haliaetus, in terms of like getting a little bit more damage for maybe a little bit less consistency. So up to you guys. I'm just going to put the numbers out there. It's really for your teams to review. Okay, so loadout help. A lot of people were asking me, what do I run on my loadouts if I'm grappling, if I'm doing this, if I'm doing that? I'll go over this real quick. This grapple slide is mostly a rehash of what Ham has in his video. So if you want some more details and some like real world examples of grapple melee, check out his video, Haminator, my goat. But component wise, we have weapons. You run Bastion, and then once your Bastion is out of ammo, you can swap to a rapid fire energy shotgun of your choosing, preferably with enhanced 1-2 punch and grave robber, especially if you're on prismatic rather than strand. And yeah, you can run Navigator if you don't have a Strand Hunter on your team, making those grapple points for you. And then armor-wise, Titan if you're running with no melee bonus, Hoyle Hoil is good because it just self-procs with grapple melee over and over, and you don't need to run Synthos or anything like that because there's no surrounded ads. Now on Corregos, I will say a little note here is that you can grapple a little high, and apparently part of his like beam hitboxes count as enemies or something. So if you grapple up high enough, like every 4th grapple, I think people were saying you grapple a little bit higher than normal, you can keep Synthos up during Corregos. So that would potentially be an option, but again, your team kind of has to commit to doing grapple melee for that to be worth it. So that's really up to your team to kind of discuss and decide on that. Hunter, you're either on Surturacne to keep up Woven Mail for Shield Crush, or you're on Syntho if you think you can manage to keep Synthos up. Warlock, you're on Apotheosis Veil, in my opinion. You could run Sanguine for a little bit more damage on your shotguns and Bastion, but that's really insignificant. I would just say be on Apotheosis so that in case you miss your grapple, you just instantly super and, you know, just have a grapple back, and also provide your teammates with a little bit of healing and, you know, getting their grapples back as well. Stat-wise, you're just going Grenade into Melee. Grenade 65%, Melee 30%. Pretty easy, obvious stuff. A little tip is you can use Tightly Woven, like I mentioned on the right here, for a free 20 grenade if you have Woven Mail active. If you're on something like Surturacne, where you have Woven Mail pretty much all the time. Now on your subclass, you want Warding, Generation, Ascent. I think that's pretty straightforward. On Titan, your 4th fragment can be Fury, so that your Tangles give you Woven Mail during neutral. Banner of War into the fray. Hunter, you're on Combination Blow with Ascension Stylish. I think the Ascension is just there to provide Amplify to your teammates for during damage DR. You could run, I don't know, Stylish and Winners if you really want, but I would say Ascension Stylish is probably a safer bet. Stylish in case you get, you know, some Stylish procs during damage or just during mechanics while you have Combination Blow. It's nice for survivability. And then Ascension is obviously for survivability in and out of damage. Widow's Silk if you're on True Strand, so you can get that double grapple charge as well as making those grapple points for your teammates. And then Warlock, your 4th fragment can be Evolution because with Mindspin Invocation, your grapple melees do in fact spawn Threadlings. Shield Crush doesn't work with Combination Blow grapple melees apparently, so just be aware of that. Pack Tactics will boost your Warlock grapple melee damage because of the Threadlings just proccing it over and over, and it should boost your Needle Storm damage as well, so that's pretty nice. And then something like a little pro tip from the solo guys, you know, hold S while you're grapple meleeing. That will make your grapple melee register more often and tighten the window that you can use to actually activate your grapple melee after you start grappling. And for Corregos in particular, make sure you flick down before you grapple melee, or like as you're grapple meleeing, like flick downward. And that will make it a lot more consistent. Once I started doing that, I was hitting Bastion grapples a lot more consistently. Okay, so that is it for grapples. Next up, we have Finality PK, or Finality in general. Weapon-wise, you're running Mint Retrograde, shocker, Rewind Bait, Temporal Armaments, Antidate, Rewind Target Lock, High Handling, Mag Perk, Temporal Armaments, and Finality's Augur. Armor, you're running Peacekeepers on Titan, Lucky Pants if you choose to do this for some reason on Hunter, and Warlock, Assembler, or Sanguine with double special instead of, you know, Antidate, obviously, and then you run Agape on Hunter as well. And your stat-wise, you're going for weapons and then super, because you are, it's a little bit weird, I guess, but you want to power your weapons, and your weapons that are giving you your super are mostly going to be your kinetic special weapons, right? And so because of that, you want to empower those weapons to help them push further into the super instance cap so you get your super faster. And if you guys have tried weapons versus super on Finality, like what should you prio? I would say people have had more success with maxing out weapons than super, but it's definitely close. It's definitely close. Next up, we have subclass Titan. You know, you run those 4 fragments: shock, resistance, frequency, brilliance. Hunter and Warlock just run whatever is good for neutral plus your stat fragments. Yeah, notes here. I don't know, not really worth using this on Hunter and Warlock because PKs are just better than Lucky Pants and anything Warlock really has. I mean, I'm sure you can hit competitive DPS on Warlock with like Sanguine and Surge maxing and Finite maybe and Mint and stuff like that, but you know, you're not really powering like a really, really strong super on Warlock. And yeah, for those of you that are not aware, by the way, the Finality turret lasts 25 seconds if you want to construct your rotation around that and like figure out when you should be redeploying your turret. And at least in our experience when we were doing testing, Dynamo is not worth sacrificing super fonts. Distribution is, like I mentioned on the earlier Finality PK slide. Next, we have Parasite Loadouts. Mint Retrograde, again, same thing. Finite maybe, Recon with Bane Switch or Reservoir Burst. I think Reservoir Burst is a little easier, less mindful gameplay. Temporal Armaments again, Parasite. Armor, Titan, you're going to be on Curus. No surprise there. Hunter, I just said Star Eater Gjallarhorn. I mean, you can really be on like a different class item. Again, Hunters are kind of backseat utility role, so not being on Star Eater Gjallarhorn is fine. I mean, no one's on Attrition Ores because everyone's like on double special with like Mint and Finite, so you're not really going to get Star Eater again, I think, during damage. So you could be on Star Eater Gjallarhorn, you could be on Renewal, you could be on Hoil, I don't know. There's a bunch of stuff you can be on. Just try stuff. Speed loaders as well. Warlock, Sanguine. pretty self-explanatory. And then stat-wise, you should be aiming for super over weapons, at least on Titan. At least on Titan. On Warlock, it might be different, but on Titan, at least, you should be going super over weapons because you are using Curus, and it is slightly more impactful to have higher super than weapons on this boss, even though a lot of your damage is weapon-focused. Subclass-wise, you're just running the same as PKs, but if you're on Prismatic, obviously make sure you're running Courage and the other relevant stat fragments that you might need. Hunter, neutral / stat fragments, and then Warlock, you're on Strand, you should be running Threadling Grenade, Weaver's Call, Weave Walk, Generation, Warding, Evolution, Ascent, and then a 5th neutral fragment of your choosing. Note-wise, I would say, like I said earlier, Bait and Switch Finite needs a little bit more mindful play compared to Reservoir, because you kind of have to think about it. Like Mint, it's easy to keep track of bait, but, you know, Finite, not as much. Remember to get times 20 before damage. A lot of people forgot about that during Parasite stuff, so just make sure you get times 20. Using an ability with Parasite out shortly before swapping to your weapon can mess with your holster. So like Parasite nade and then swapping to your weapon can mess with your holster timing. So I would say do Parasite, swap to the weapon, then throw your nade, or do the weapon first and then throw your nade and then swap back. And then obviously make sure you're close enough to get Worm Byproduct. Your first Parasite, keep your distance, but your second Parasite, you can do Parasite, Crash, Parasite. And your second Parasite, you should definitely try to do a little bit of self-damage with, because you're crashing into the boss, and your second Parasite doesn't have the times 20 boost, and you'll be right next to the boss anyway. So just make sure you're kind of like going a little bit closer to the boss every once in a while to re-trigger Worm Byproduct. Okay, and then fourth, we have the Haliaetus. Weapon-wise, you're going to be using Mint Retrograde. Wow, yep, same thing, same roll. Or Newman Pice. And then in your energy slot, you can use Lord of Wolves or Finite Maybe with the same roll that we were talking about just now for Parasite. Haliaetus, you're going to be using Cluster, Bipod, or Aggregate. I would say Bipod most of the time with Temporal Armaments. Armor, Titan, you're on Curus. Hunter, I mean, if you're really being on like a Legendary Rocket, there's a bunch of stuff you can put. I put Depends because it really depends. Does your teammates want you to do Renewal for DR? Do your teammates want you on Speed Loaders for their Grenade Reload? What do your teammates want from you? Warlock, Sanguine, pretty straightforward. Stats, you want Super, then Grenade, then Weapons. Subclass wise, Titan, you're on Storm Grenade, Touch of Thunder, Shock, Magnitude, Frequency, and Resistance for, you know, neutral play. You could choose to run something like Brilliance if you're willing to sacrifice something like Shock, because only one person really needs to run Shock to keep the boss jolted. Doesn't really matter if multiple people run it, plus that's a -10 grenade fragment, so kind of annoying. Hunter, again, depends on what you're doing. And Warlock, same as the Parasite stuff. So a couple notes. Probably put your Hunter on Galley. Worse nades and super. Talked about this already. Warlock is a strong abuser of pack tactics, so make sure you have that on. And experiment with running Dynamo versus Super Font. I tried both. Results were kind of similar. I ran like 2 Super Font, 1 Dynamo, 3 Super Font. Pretty similar stuff. Generally, your rocket rotation should be rocket, reload, and then grenade at the end of your reload to cancel the end of your reload animation. On Warlock, because you have Threat of Ascent access, you actually never need to reload your rocket. And I'll show you an example of that in a second here. And finally, aim so your rocket clusters kind of get stuck in the hitbox. On Corregos, that means you're aiming right above his lip in like the corner of one of his like eyeball areas. And then on Hydra, on Apoptes, it means you're aiming right under his chin. So the rocket goes right under there and explodes and gets a maximum cluster efficacy. Okay, so yeah, that's Haliaetus. Let's talk strategy. So what do I actually recommend for each of the bosses in their current forms in DP? So for Agrios, he's a little too flighty for Haliaetus. He moves around a lot. You can miss rockets. Also, the clusters, he has a very thin body, so they're unlikely to hit him effectively. And PKs are definitely awkward, I would say, because when he goes up, you kind of just have to shoot Mint, and you can't really do anything with PKs, and your turret probably doesn't target him, depending on where he goes. And, you know, they're usable if you really want to use PKs. I've definitely seen people use them on him, so you can try them if you want, but I do think Parasite and Grapples are much better. If you leave ads alive here, which is, you know, it's a risk your team can take, you could definitely do Syntho Combination Blow on this boss with certain people, and it would definitely do a lot of damage. So, yeah, something you can try. Apoptes, Worm Byproduct, is a bit annoying on this boss, so Parasite's kind of out of the picture here. Grapples are definitely very awkward, given the spacing here, and so yeah, I'm not going to recommend that either. Peacekeepers are pretty solid. I would say Peacekeepers are pretty solid here, but Haliaetus is better. We one-phased like first try using Haliaetus on this boss, and it was the same for Corregos. So yeah, I don't know if people are one-phasing this boss with PKs on -30. I'm not sure, but yeah, this is a boss you could try PKs on, but I would honestly just use Haliaetus unless you're having ammo issues. Iatros, so our good friend the Wyvern. Like I mentioned, it seems to take increased ability damage, at least super damage. He was taking like 54% more. PKs are bad because no crit. Haliaetus is awkward. I did try Haliaetus with my team on this boss. Maybe you'll have better success than I did, but we even tried song snapping him and stun locking him, and he's just annoying, right? Like if he's just moving around at all, it's just annoying. He's close to you and diastole, or your teammates getting booped up and down while you're doing rockets or DPS. Just awkward. I think Parasite and Mint were one-phasing this boss consistently, even without having 4 Titans, right? We had 2 Warlocks, 3 Titans, and 1 Hunter, and we were one-phasing this boss pretty consistently on Cutthroat. So yeah, Parasite Mint, that's an option. And then grapple melees. Grapple melees, if your teammates are down for it, it's pretty decent on this boss as well. So I would say, yeah, Agrios, Parasite grapples. Epoptes, I would say Haliaetus and maybe PKs, and then Iatros, Parasite and grapples. Okay, finally, the elephant in the room, or the large dome-shaped flowery harpy, Corregos, right? Everything really works on this guy. You could do all 4 of the strats. So what is the highest DPS? What's the best idea? It's a Haliaetus arms race. Yeah, it's a Haliaetus arms race. I'll roll the clip. Roll the clip.
My grenade was shot out of the air.
W.
It says not on. No trucks. You're good.
Don't kill. Okay, that was pretty good from me.
Okay, so yeah, in that clip, I hit 212k damage in 1 phase. And by the way, Parasite Mint on this guy, which is like, fairly decent on this guy. We one phased with it, but it was hard. It was definitely hard, right? We only one phased with it, but it was definitely significantly harder than this. The damage you're seeing right now, the damage that you just saw, that health bar when we wiped, 2 of my teammates were not doing damage. Okay, 2 of my teammates were not doing damage, right? And when we tried to one phase fast, like when we were, trying and we did a couple of practice runs, we one phased with 13 seconds left in the Corregos damage phase, which for reference is 80 seconds long. So yeah, damage is pretty good. It's pretty good damage, guys. Pretty good damage. Okay. Yeah, that is pretty much all I have to say. Hopefully this clears things up for you guys. Tyrese Halliburton sends his regards. It's Haliban season. Enjoy, and I hope Haliaetus doesn't get disabled, because this is pretty fun, honestly. Like, this contest race, a lot of the damage stuff that we're using is pretty unorthodox, so pretty excited. Hopefully Haliaetus doesn't get disabled and damage checks are a little bit tight, and we get to play around with our rockets and stuff, because it's been a blast testing, and I hope you guys have enjoyed the contest testing that I've been doing on stream, because I know it's not really something you get to see on stream very often. I don't know of any other content creators that are really extensively testing stuff on -30 Corregos. So I hope you guys enjoyed the streams. If you guys are curious what the rotations look like, they're all in my VODs, right? Don't look at the early parts of the VODs, because obviously I'm messing up and being a noob on some of those rotations, but later on in the VODs, I start perfecting them a little bit more. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Tomorrow I'm going to make a little build video. Build video is super simple this time around, thanks to Nuke Swap, Nuke Swap. I guess that's one good thing that came from this whole ordeal. But happy testing, everyone, and as usual, leave any feedback you have in the comments. And happy blasting.